The stars looked different this far out on the frontier. Captain Jake Morrison had been watching them through the viewport of his scout ship for 3 hours, thinking about how cold and distant they seemed. He was 32 years old, had been in the fleet for 10 years, and still couldn't shake the feeling that space wanted to swallow him whole. "Captain, we're picking up something on the long-range sensors," his communications officer, Lieutenant Danny Cross, called from his station. "Looks like debris from a destroyed transport." Jake turned away from the window and walked to the command console. His ship, the Frontier Runner, was small compared to the massive battleships that fought in the war, but it was fast and perfect for patrol duty. They had been checking the outer colonies for 3 weeks now, making sure the Kalarathi hadn't pushed deeper into human territory. The war had been going on for 15 years. Jake had been just 17 when it started, fresh out of high school and eager to see the galaxy. He got his wish, though not in the way he imagined. The Kalarathi Empire had swept through the border systems without warning, and humanity had been fighting for survival ever since. "Take us in closer," Jake ordered. "But keep the shields up and weapons ready." The crew moved efficiently. Jake had trained them well. There were only 12 people on the Frontier Runner, and they trusted each other with their lives. Danny at communications, Lisa Grant on weapons, Kevin Park running engineering, and 9 others who made up the best scout crew Jake had ever commanded. As they approached the debris field, Jake felt his stomach tighten. The wreckage was from a civilian transport, the kind that carried families between colonies. Pieces of hull plating drifted in the void, along with personal belongings that glittered in the starlight. A child's toy, a suitcase. Things that spoke of lives ended too soon. "Any survivors?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "Negative, sir," Danny replied quietly. "Life support signals are all flat." Jake clenched his fists. This was the part of the war that never got easier. The Kalarathi didn't just fight soldiers. They hit civilian targets to break humanity's spirit, to make people afraid to live on the frontier worlds. "Log the coordinates and send a message back to Fleet Command," Jake said. "We'll need a recovery team out here to—" The alarm blared across the bridge before he could finish. Red lights flashed as the tactical display lit up with contact markers. "3 Kalarathi fighters coming in fast from the asteroid belt," Lisa shouted. They must have been waiting in ambush. "Evasive maneuvers," Jake snapped, gripping the back of his command chair. "Get us out of here." The Frontier Runner lurched as the pilot threw the ship into a hard turn, but scout ships weren't built for combat. They were built to run, to gather information and escape. The problem was that Kalarathi fighters were faster. The first plasma blast rocked the ship, sending sparks flying from a console on the port side. Jake heard someone scream. The lights flickered and emergency systems kicked in. "Shields at 60%, Kevin called from engineering. "We can't take many more hits like that." "Return fire," Jake ordered. "Everything we've got." Lisa worked the weapons console, sending railgun rounds and missiles toward the Kalarathi fighters. One missile found its mark, and an enemy ship exploded in a ball of green fire. But the other 2 kept coming, pouring plasma fire into the Frontier Runner's shields. The bridge filled with smoke. Jake could barely see through it, could barely hear orders being shouted over the noise of failing systems. Another hit, harder this time. The ship shuddered and something exploded in the back section. "Hull breach in engineering," Kevin's voice came through, strained with pain. "I'm sealing it off, but we've lost main power." Jake knew they were finished. His mind raced through options, but there were none left. They couldn't outrun the Kalarathi now, couldn't fight them, couldn't even jump to faster-than-light speeds with the engines damaged. "All hands abandon ship," he said into the ship-wide comm. "This is not a drill. Get to the escape pods now." But even as he gave the order, he saw on his display that the Kalarathi fighters were targeting the escape pods as they launched. One by one, the small life pods were destroyed before they could get far enough away. His crew, his friends, turned to vapor and debris. Danny looked at him from the communications station, blood running down the side of his face from a head wound. "Captain, what do we—" The plasma bolt that hit the bridge cut off his words forever. Jake was thrown backward, his head smashing against the bulkhead. Through blurred vision, he saw flames consuming the bridge, saw bodies that didn't move anymore. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't work right. Everything hurt. The last thing he remembered clearly was the sound of metal being torn apart as the Kalarathi boarded his ship. Through the smoke, he saw them, tall and armored, with 4 arms and faces hidden behind helmets. They moved through the wreckage with purpose, checking bodies, looking for survivors. One of them found Jake. The alien towered over him, easily 7 feet tall, covered in purple and black armor. Jake tried to reach for his sidearm, but his hand wouldn't close around it. The Kalrathi kicked the weapon away. "This one lives," the alien said in heavily accented human speech. "Command rank, by the uniform. Take him." Jake felt hands grab him, rough and strong. He wanted to fight, to resist, but his body wouldn't respond. The pain in his head was overwhelming, and darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. As they dragged him off the ruined bridge, past the bodies of his crew, Jake's last conscious thought was a prayer that death would come quickly. He had heard stories about what happened to human prisoners in Kalathi hands. The torture, the experiments, the long months of agony before they finally let you die. The darkness took him then, pulling him down into unconsciousness. When he woke up, he was in a cell somewhere cold and far from home, and the real nightmare was just beginning. But Jake Morrison couldn't know, that this capture would lead to something impossible. He didn't know about the woman who would interrogate him, or the child who would change everything, or the choice he would make that would redefine what it meant to be human. All he knew was pain, and the distant stars that he would not see again for a very long time. Jake woke up to cold metal against his back, and the smell of something sharp and chemical in the air. His head throbbed with pain so intense he thought his skull might split open. When he tried to move, he discovered his wrists and ankles were locked in restraints that hummed with energy. He was lying on an angled platform in a room with walls that glowed a faint purple. The door opened with a hiss, and she walked in. Commander Lyra Velzera was not what Jake expected from a Kalathi warrior. She was tall, yes, nearly 6.5 feet, with the 4 arms and violet skin of her species. But where he expected brutality, he saw precision. Where he expected rage, he saw cold calculation. She wore a uniform that marked her as high-ranking military, and her movements were graceful despite her size. Her eyes were the most unsettling part. They were completely violet, with no visible pupil, and they studied him with the intensity of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "Captain Jake Morrison?" she said in perfect human speech, her accent barely noticeable. "You commanded the scout vessel we destroyed. 12 crew members, all dead, except you." Jake said nothing. He had been trained for this. Name, rank, service number. Nothing else. "I am Commander Lyra Valsara, Intelligence Division," she continued, walking around the platform where he was restrained. "You will tell me about human fleet movements in this sector. You will tell me about your defensive capabilities. You will tell me everything, eventually. They all do. Morrison Jake." "Captain, service number 7739421, he said, his voice rough. Lyra tilted her head slightly, a gesture that might have been amusement. "Yes, I already know these things. What I want to know is why your people continue fighting a war you cannot win, why you push into territories that do not belong to you, why you refuse peace when we offer it." Jake almost laughed, though it hurt his ribs to do so. "Peace? You call burning civilian transports peace?" Something flickered across Lyra's face, too quick for him to read. "War is war, Captain. Both sides have done terrible things. My mate died when your forces bombed a medical facility on Korath Station. He was a healer, not a soldier. So do not speak to me of innocence." She left then, the door sealing behind her with finality. The days that followed blurred together into an endless cycle of pain. Lyra came every day, sometimes twice a day, with questions Jake wouldn't answer. When he refused, there were consequences. Electric shocks that made his muscles seize. Drugs that made him feel like his skin was on fire. Long hours in darkness so complete he couldn't tell if his eyes were open or closed. But Lyra never participated in the physical torture herself. She watched, she asked questions during it, but she never laid a hand on him. That job belonged to others, Kalrathi soldiers who seemed to enjoy their work. Through it all, Jake held on to one thought. His crew died quickly. He could endure anything if it meant their sacrifice wasn't meaningless, if it meant he didn't betray other humans who were still out there fighting. 6 weeks passed. Jake could feel himself breaking down, piece by piece. His body was covered in burns and scars. He had lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. Sometimes he forgot what day it was or how long he had been in the cell. But he noticed something else, too. Lyra's questions were changing. She asked less about fleet movements and more about Earth, about human culture, about why humans valued individual life so highly. She seemed genuinely curious, as if she was trying to understand something that didn't make sense to her. "Why did you become a soldier?" she asked one day, sitting across from him in the interrogation room. For once, no torture equipment was active. Jake was too tired to maintain complete silence. "To protect people," he said simply. "From us. From anyone who would hurt them. In Calrathi culture, the individual matters less than the whole. We serve the Empire, the collective. Your human idea that every single life has infinite value, it seems inefficient, impractical." "Maybe," Jake said, meeting her violet eyes. "But it's what makes us human." He thought he saw something in her expression then, something almost like doubt, but it was gone too quickly to be sure. The change came on day 53 of his captivity. The facility shook with an explosion that sent Lyra stumbling against the wall. Alarms blared, and through the small window in his cell, Jake could see flashes of light in the sky. A human bombing raid hitting military targets on Calrathi Prime. Another explosion. Closer this time. The lights went out and emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in red. Jake heard shouting in the Calrathi language, heard boots running in corridors. Then he heard a different sound, the groan of metal and the crash of collapsing structure. The wall of his cell cracked but didn't break. Through the gap he could see into the corridor beyond, where a part of the ceiling had come down. And underneath the debris, pinned and struggling, was Lyra. Jake's restraints had deactivated when the power failed. He pulled his hands free, his wrists bleeding from weeks of chafing against the metal. Every muscle in his body screamed as he moved, but he forced himself to stand, to stumble to the cracked wall. He could have run. This was his chance, maybe his only chance, to escape during the chaos. But Lyra was trapped. One of her 4 arms bent at an angle that looked wrong. A support beam had her pinned across the chest, and she was struggling to breathe. Her violet eyes met his through the gap in the wall. "Go," she gasped. "Save yourself, human." Jake looked down the corridor. It was empty for the moment, everyone evacuating or responding to the attack. He could disappear into the chaos, maybe steal a ship, maybe get home. He looked back at Lyra, at the person who had watched him be tortured for nearly 2 months. "Damn it," he muttered, and started kicking at the cracked wall. It took 3 tries before the weakened section gave way enough for him to squeeze through. His ribs protested every movement, and he was pretty sure he reopened some of the burns on his back, but he made it into the corridor. The support beam was heavy. Reinforced metal meant to hold up a building. Jake grabbed it with both hands and pulled. Nothing. He repositioned, planted his feet, and pulled again with everything he had left. The beam shifted slightly. "You're insane," Lyra said, coughing. "You should run." "Shut up and help push when I lift," Jake growled. He pulled again, putting his whole body into it, feeling something tear in his shoulder, but not stopping. Lyra pushed with her 3 good arms, and together they moved the beam just enough for her to slide free. Jake collapsed against the wall, gasping. Blood ran down his shoulder where something had given way. Lyra stood slowly, cradling her injured arm, staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Why?" she asked. Jake looked up at her, this enemy who had overseen his torture, and gave her the only answer he had. "Because it was right." Another explosion rocked the facility. Lyra made a decision in that moment, one that would change both their lives forever. She reached down with one of her good hands and pulled Jake to his feet. "Come," she said. "We need to get to a shelter before this whole section comes down." She could have left him there, could have escaped alone. But she didn't. And in that moment, something shifted between them, some fundamental understanding that they were not just enemy soldier and prisoner anymore. They were 2 people who had chosen compassion when hate would have been easier. Neither of them knew yet about the experiment, about the child, about the impossible situation that was already growing in a laboratory deep beneath their feet. But the foundation was laid, the trust begun. For better or worse, their fates were now intertwined. The medical shelter beneath the facility was crowded with wounded Calrathi soldiers and civilians. Lyra had pulled Jake through 3 collapsing corridors to get there, and now they sat in a corner while medics worked on the more seriously injured. Jake's shoulder throbbed with a deep grinding pain, but he was alive, which was more than he expected. Lyra sat against the wall next to him, her injured arm wrapped in a temporary brace. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Around them, the Calrathi talked in their own language, occasionally glancing at Jake with suspicion or outright hatred. He was the enemy, after all, and his people had just bombed their city. "They want to kill you," Lyra said quietly. "The others. They blame you for the attack." "Do you?" Jake asked. She looked at him with those unsettling violet eyes. "I blame war. I blame leaders on both sides who profit from keeping us fighting. But you specifically? No. You are just a soldier like I am." 3 days later, when the facility was being rebuilt, Lyra returned Jake to his cell. But something had changed. The torture stopped. She still came to question him, but now she brought food that was almost edible and allowed him time to heal. She never mentioned what happened during the bombing, and neither did he. 2 months passed. Jake's injuries healed slowly, leaving new scars to add to his collection. Lyra continued her visits, but the interrogations had become something else entirely. They talked about their worlds, their lives before the war, the things they had lost. Jake learned that Lyra had been a scientist before becoming a soldier, that she had studied xenobiology and dreamed of exploring peaceful worlds. She learned that Jake had wanted to be a teacher, that he joined the military to pay for school, and ended up staying because someone had to protect the colonies. Then, one night, Lyra came to his cell with a look on her face that Jake had never seen before. "Fear. I need to tell you something," she said, standing at the door instead of entering. Her 4 hands clenched and unclenched nervously. "Something terrible has happened." Jake sat up on his bunk. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," she said, and the words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake blinked, confused. "I don't understand. Your mate died over a year ago, you said." "How is that?" "It is not his child," Lyra interrupted, her voice tight. "There was a program, secret. Some military scientists believed they could create superior soldiers by combining our genetic material with human DNA. They took samples from prisoners without permission, without consent. They used your genetic material, Jake, and mine." The room seemed to tilt. Jake gripped the edge of his bunk to steady himself. "That's not possible. We're different species. The biology wouldn't—" "They made it possible," Lyra said bitterly. "Genetic manipulation, advanced technology. I only discovered it 3 days ago when I went for a routine medical scan. The scientists responsible have been arrested, but the damage is done."
Jake stood up, his legs unsteady.
"A child. Our child. A hybrid," Lyra corrected. "An abomination by Calrethi law. The military council has ordered me to terminate the pregnancy. They want to erase all evidence of the program." "No," Jake said immediately. "You can't." Lyra's eyes flashed. "You think I want to? In my culture, children are sacred, even those conceived in the worst circumstances. But this child will never be accepted by my people. She will be hunted, killed, seen as a corruption of Kalsathra purity." "She?" Jake asked softly. Lyra nodded. "The scans show female development, a daughter, Jake. Created without our choice, but still innocent of any crime. Jake moved to the energy barrier that separated them. Then we protect her. Both of us." "How?" Lyra demanded. "I am already under investigation. They will force the termination, or they will kill me and the child together. And you are a prisoner. What can either of us do?" "We escape," Jake said. "Together." Lyra stared at him like he had lost his mind. "Escape from the most secure military facility on Calrethi Prime? With me pregnant and you barely recovered from torture? That is suicide." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But what's the alternative? Let them kill an innocent child because she's different? I won't accept that, will you?" For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "No, I will not." Planning the escape took 2 weeks. Lyra used her remaining security clearance to gather information, to find weaknesses in the facility's defenses. She learned that several guards, horrified by the forced genetic experiments, were sympathetic to her situation. Not enough to openly rebel, but enough to look the other way at the right moment. Jake recovered his strength as best he could, exercising in his cell, preparing his body for what would come. His shoulder still ached, probably always would, but he could use it. That would have to be enough. The night they chose was during a shift change when security was thinnest. Lyra came to his cell dressed in light armor, carrying a weapon. She deactivated the energy barrier without a word. "There are 2 guards at the north checkpoint who will not raise the alarm," she said. "But once we are past them, every soldier in this facility will be hunting us." "Are you certain about this?" Jake picked up the second weapon she had brought. "For that little girl who didn't ask to be created?" "I'm certain." They moved through the corridors like ghosts, avoiding patrols using service tunnels that Lyra had mapped. Twice they had to hide while soldiers passed. Once they had to knock out a guard who spotted them, and Jake felt bad about that until he remembered all the times that same guard had participated in his torture. The north checkpoint was exactly where Lyra said it would be. 2 guards stood there, and when they saw Lyra and Jake approaching, they simply stepped aside. One of them, a young Calrathi female, spoke softly as they passed. "May the ancestors protect your child, Commander." What they did was wrong, Then they were through, running across an open landing pad where small transport ships sat in neat rows. Alarms began to blare behind them. Someone had noticed they were gone. There, Lyra pointed to a fast courier ship. It has the range to reach neutral space if we push the engines. They climbed aboard, and Lyra's hands flew across the controls with practiced ease. The engines hummed to life. Behind them, Jake could see soldiers pouring onto the landing pad, weapons raised. The ship lifted off, and that's when the shooting started. Plasma bolts streaked past the viewport. One hit the ship's aft section, sending sparks flying through the cabin. Another hit the starboard engine, and warning lights blazed across the control panel. "Hold on!" Lyra shouted, pushing the throttle forward. They shot into the sky, leaving Kalrathi Prime behind. More ships were launching to pursue them, faster military fighters that would catch them in minutes. But Jake saw something else too. He saw a human patrol ship, far in the distance, responding to the activity. If those human ships saw him on a Kalrathi vessel, they would shoot first and ask questions never. "We need to reach neutral space," Jake said. "The Broken Edge station. It's lawless territory. Neither side claims it." "We can hide there," Lyra nodded, adjusting their course. But the pursuing ships were gaining, and the damaged engine was losing power. They weren't going to make it. A plasma bolt hit them square in the rear, and the ship lurched violently. Jake was thrown against the bulkhead, and he felt ribs crack from the impact. Pain exploded through his chest. "Jake!" Lyra called. "I'm okay," he gasped, pulling himself back to his feet. "Keep flying." Another hit, and another. The ship was dying around them, but ahead Jake could see the shimmer of the boundary into neutral space. Just a few more minutes. A direct hit struck the cockpit, and Jake saw it coming. He threw himself in front of Lyra, taking the blast of sparks and shrapnel that erupted from the destroyed console. He felt something burn into his left side, felt his whole body go numb from the waist down. But they crossed the boundary, neutral space. The Kalrathi ship stopped pursuing, unwilling to violate the treaties that kept the station neutral. Lyra was screaming his name, but Jake couldn't hear her clearly anymore. Everything sounded distant, muffled. He was on the floor of the ship, and he could smell burning flesh. "The station," he managed to say. "Get us to the station. The child. Protect the child." Lyra was crying, he realized. He had never seen a Kalrathi cry before. She piloted the dying ship toward the distant lights of the Broken Edge station, one hand on the controls and another trying to stop the bleeding from Jake's side. They crashed more than landed, the ship skidding across a docking platform and slamming into cargo containers. Jake's vision was fading, darkness creeping in, but he felt hands pulling him from the wreckage. Desperate and commanding, demanding medical help. Then nothing but darkness and pain, and the distant hope that maybe, just maybe, he had done enough. That their daughter would have a chance to live. Jake woke up 3 days later in a room that smelled like disinfectant and rust. The walls were stained metal, and medical equipment that looked like it had been salvaged from a dozen different ships beeped softly around him. Everything hurt, but especially his left side, which felt like someone had replaced his flesh with burning metal. A doctor appeared above him, human but with cybernetic implants covering half his face. "Easy there, friend. You took a plasma blast at close range. I had to replace about 30% of your left side with synthetic tissue and nerve grafts. You'll live, but you'll never feel quite right on that side again." "Where is she?" Jake managed to croak out. "The Kalrathi woman? She's fine. Been here every day, watching you like a hawk. Won't let anyone near you without her permission." The doctor shrugged. "Strange pair, you two. But then again, this is the Broken Edge. We've seen stranger." Lyra came in an hour later, and Jake could see the pregnancy now. Just a slight curve to her abdomen, barely noticeable under the loose clothing she wore, but it was there. Their daughter, growing despite everything. "You are awake," she said, relief clear in her voice. "The doctor said you might not survive. You lost too much blood." "Takes more than that," Jake said, trying to smile but wincing at the pain. "How long do we have before someone finds us?" "Not long," Lyra admitted, sitting in the chair beside his bed. "Both our governments are looking for us. The Kalrathi want to eliminate the hybrid child. The humans want you back and see me as a high-value prisoner. We have perhaps weeks, maybe a month if we are lucky." Jake tried to sit up, gasping as pain lanced through his side. Lyra moved to help him, surprisingly gentle for someone so strong. "We need a plan. We can't keep running forever, not with a baby." Over the next 2 weeks, as Jake slowly healed, they worked whatever jobs they could on the station. Lyra used her technical skills to repair equipment for traders and smugglers. Jake, still weak but determined, took security shifts at some of the station's seedier establishments. The pay was terrible and the work was dangerous, but they earned enough credits to rent a tiny apartment in the station's lower levels. At night, they planned. They talked about where they could go, what life might look like for a hybrid child who belonged to neither species. They argued sometimes, their different cultures clashing, but they always came back to the same truth. They were both committed to protecting the innocent life growing between them. 3 months after their escape, Hope was born. The labor was terrible. Lyra's body, designed for Calrithi children, struggled with the hybrid biology. The same back-alley doctor who had saved Jake did his best, but there were complications he couldn't predict. The birth took 18 hours, and there were moments when Jake thought he would lose both of them. He stayed by Lyra's side the entire time, despite his own lingering injuries. When she screamed in pain, he held her hand, whispering encouragement even though he felt helpless. When the doctor said the baby was in distress, Jake refused to leave, refused to let Lyra face it alone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a baby's cry filled the small medical room. Hope was tiny, smaller than a normal Calrithi infant, but larger than a human newborn. Her skin was pale violet, lighter than her mother's, and her eyes, when she opened them, were the same striking violet. But her features were softer, more human in their proportions. She had 4 arms like her mother, but her fingers were more delicate, more human. The doctor placed her in Lyra's arms, and Jake watched as the fierce Calrithi warrior transformed into something he had never seen before. A mother, exhausted and overwhelmed with love for this tiny being they had created, however unwillingly. "She is beautiful," Lyra whispered, tears running down her face. Jake reached out carefully, and Hope wrapped one tiny hand around his finger. The grip was surprisingly strong. "She's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Hello, Hope. We've been waiting for you." For 3 precious months, they lived as something resembling a family. It wasn't traditional, wasn't normal by any standard, but it was theirs. Jake would work his security shifts, then come home to find Lyra teaching Hope words in both Calrithi and human languages. Lyra would repair equipment while Jake held Hope, singing her old Earth songs his mother had taught him. They didn't talk about romance or love. What they had was deeper than that, forged in shared trauma and a mutual commitment to their daughter. They were partners, co-parents, survivors bonded by the impossible situation they found themselves in. But the peace couldn't last. The bounty hunter found them on a Tuesday morning. Jake was at the market buying supplies when he noticed the Calrithi warrior watching him from across the crowded corridor. The hunter was massive, even by Calrithi standards, covered in scars and carrying weapons that were illegal even on the lawless Broken Edge. Jake ran, pushing through the crowd, his damaged legs slowing him down. Behind him, he heard shouting and the sound of weapons fire. The hunter didn't care about collateral damage. He burst into their apartment, gasping, "Lyra, we need to go now." But Lyra was already packing, Hope strapped to her chest in a carrier. "I know. I saw him on the security feeds. He is a professional, Jake. He won't stop until we are dead." They fled through the station's maintenance tunnels, but the hunter was relentless. He tracked them through the lower levels, getting closer with each turn. Finally, they were cornered in a dead-end corridor near the station's docking bays. The hunter stepped into view, a massive weapon aimed at them. "Commander Velsara, the Empire has placed a bounty on your head and the hybrid child. 50,000 credits. Nothing personal." Hope began to cry, sensing the danger. Lyra held her close, her other hands reaching for weapons she didn't have. Jake stepped in front of them both, unarmed and wounded, but refusing to move. "You'll have to go through me," he said. The hunter laughed. "That can be arranged, human." The blast never came. Instead, station security arrived, drawn by the commotion. The hunter cursed and retreated, unwilling to fight an entire security force. But Jake knew he would be back. They all would. The Calrithi wanted Hope dead. Human intelligence wanted Jake back. There was no safe place for them on the Broken Edge or anywhere else they could reach. That night, Jake made the hardest decision of his life. "I'm turning myself in to human authorities," he told Lyra. "No," she said immediately. "We stay together. We find another way." "There is no other way," Jake said, his voice breaking. "Hope will never be safe while both governments are hunting her. But I can make a deal. I'll trade my cooperation for safe passage for you and Hope to a remote colony. New identities, protection, a chance at a normal life." Lyra stood, anger flashing in her eyes. "And what about you?" They will interrogate you, suspect you of collaboration. You could be imprisoned, or worse. I know, Jake said quietly. But she's worth it. You're both worth it. He looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully despite the danger surrounding her. She was 4 months old, innocent and perfect, and she deserved a chance to grow up without looking over her shoulder. I'll tell them I escaped alone, Jake continued. I'll never mention Hope's hybrid nature. As far as anyone knows, you're just a Calrathi defector with a normal child. They'll give you new identities on some quiet frontier world. You'll be safe. And I will never see you again, Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe not, Jake admitted. But Hope will live. That's what matters. Lyra was silent for a long time, holding their daughter close. Finally she nodded, tears streaming down her face. You are the bravest person I have ever known, Jake Morrison. Hope will know that. I will make certain she knows what you sacrificed for her. 3 days later, Jake walked into a human military outpost on the edge of neutral space and surrendered. He negotiated the deal he promised, safe passage for 2 refugees to the colony world of New Cascade in exchange for his full cooperation and debriefing. The last time he saw Hope, she was sleeping in Lyra's arms as they boarded a transport ship under the names Laura Vale and her daughter Amy. Lyra looked back at him once, her violet eyes meeting his across the docking bay. Then they were gone, and Jake was led away to face interrogation, psychological evaluation, and the long, painful process of convincing his own people he wasn't a traitor. He never told them about Hope. That secret he kept locked in his heart, even when the questioning became harsh, even when they suspected him of collaboration. For his daughter, for the innocent child he barely got to know, Jake endured every bit of pain and suspicion his own government threw at him, because that's what fathers do. They protect their children, no matter the cost. 2 years crawled by like a lifetime. Jake had been cleared of collaboration charges after 6 months of intense interrogation, but the suspicion never fully left the eyes of his fellow officers. He was reassigned to a training facility on Mars, far from the front lines, teaching new recruits basic combat tactics. It was safe, boring work that gave him too much time to think. Every night he wondered about Hope. Was she healthy? Happy? Did she remember him at all? Or was he just a stranger who had disappeared from her life? He had no way of knowing. The agreement was clear. No contact, no updates, complete separation, to keep them safe. The war ground on, both sides exhausted but too proud to stop. Casualties mounted. Entire colonies were destroyed. And through it all, Jake taught young soldiers how to survive, how to kill, how to protect the people they loved, all while missing the daughter he had given everything to save. Then, in the 3rd year after his surrender, something changed. A new faction rose within the Calrathi Empire, led by younger military leaders who had grown tired of endless death. They called themselves the Coalition for Reason, and they began pushing for peace talks. At first, the human government dismissed it as propaganda, but the coalition proved they were serious by unilaterally ceasing attacks on civilian targets. Peace negotiations began slowly, carefully, with both sides suspicious of every word. As part of building trust, they agreed to exchange information about war crimes and illegal military programs. Both governments needed to prove they were willing to hold their own people accountable. That's when the truth about the hybrid program came out. A Calrathi scientist, one of those who had been arrested when the program was discovered, provided testimony to the Peace Commission. He detailed everything: the unauthorized genetic experiments, the prisoners whose DNA was used without consent, the hybrids that were created and then destroyed when the program was shut down. But he also mentioned one hybrid that survived, a female child born to Commander Lyra Velshera and created from the genetic material of a human prisoner. He didn't know if the child still lived, but he knew she had escaped with her mother. The testimony went public, broadcast across both human and Karathi space. The outrage was immediate and widespread. People on both sides were horrified by the violation, by the cruelty of the experiments. Jake was in his quarters on Mars when his commanding officer came to find him. "Captain Morrison, we need to talk," Colonel Patricia Hayes said, her expression unreadable. "There's been a development regarding your time as a prisoner." Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he followed her to a secure briefing room. Inside, 3 other officers waited, along with someone he didn't expect, a representative from the Peace Commission. "Captain, we've reviewed the testimony from the Calrathi scientist," Hayes began. "We've also cross-referenced it with your medical records from when you were recovered and your debriefing statements. The timeline matches. You were the prisoner whose genetic material was used." Jake said nothing, his mind racing. We also located Commander Velshara, the Peace Commission representative said. She's living under the name Laura Vale on New Cascade with a 4-year-old daughter named Amy. Captain Morrison, we know the child is yours. Jake's carefully maintained composure cracked. Is she safe? Are they both safe? Hayes looked at him with something that might have been respect. Yes. Commander Velshara provided testimony about the program and about your actions to protect her and the child. Captain Morrison, instead of being court-martialed for withholding information, you've become something else entirely. What do you mean? You're a symbol, the Peace Commission representative explained. A human soldier who protected an innocent life, even an enemy's child, at great personal cost. Your story is resonating with people who are tired of war. They want to believe that compassion is still possible, that we can move beyond hatred. Jake didn't care about being a symbol. He cared about one thing only. Can I see them? The officers exchanged glances. Finally, Hayes nodded. You're being granted leave, Captain. We've arranged transport to New Cascade. What happens next is up to you and Commander Velesera. The journey to New Cascade took 3 days, and every hour felt like torture. Jake replayed memories in his mind. Hope's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, her violet eyes looking up at him, the weight of her in his arms during those precious months on the broken edge. Would she remember him? Would Lyra even want to see him? 2 years was a long time. Maybe she had built a new life, one where a damaged human soldier didn't fit anymore. New Cascade was a green world, covered in vast farms and small settlements. The colony was young, peaceful, far from the war that still simmered in other sectors. Jake's transport landed in the main settlement, and a local guide drove him out to a modest house on the edge of a wheat field. He stood outside for a full minute, too nervous to knock. His hands were shaking, and his damaged leg ached from the long journey. The scars on his side pulled tight, reminding him of everything they had endured. Finally, he knocked. The door opened, and there she was. Lyra, wearing simple human clothes, her forearms still graceful despite the domestic setting. Her violet eyes widened in shock. "Jake," she whispered. "Hello, Lyra," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't ask first. They told me where you were, and I just had to see her. Had to see you both." "Mama, who is it?" A small voice came from inside the house, and then Hope appeared, peeking around Lyra's legs. She was 4 years old now, so much bigger than Jake remembered. Her violet skin had lightened even more, and her features were a perfect blend of both species. She wore a yellow dress and held a toy spaceship in one of her small hands. She looked at Jake with curiosity but no recognition. Why would she remember? She had been just a baby when he left. Jake's heart broke a little, but he knelt down anyway, wincing as his damaged leg protested. "Hello, Hope." "I'm Jake. I'm your father." Hope studied him with those intelligent violet eyes, so like her mother's. She looked up at Lyra, who nodded, tears already streaming down her face. "Mama says you're a hero," Hope said seriously. "She says you saved us." Jake's throat was too tight to speak for a moment. "Your mama is the brave one," he finally managed. "She's the one who kept you safe all this time." Hope took a step closer, reaching out to touch the scars on Jake's face with one small hand. "Do they hurt?" "Not anymore," Jake lied. "Mama has scars too," Hope said matter-of-factly. "From when we ran away. She says scars mean you survived something hard." "Your mama's right," Jake said. Lyra was openly crying now. She knelt down beside them, her forearms wrapping around both Jake and Hope. "You came back," she said. "I thought I would never see you again." "I promised to protect her," Jake said. "Both of you. I'm sorry it took so long." They stayed like that for a long moment, the three of them together on the doorstep of a house on a peaceful world, while the war raged on in distant stars. Over the following weeks, Jake learned about the life Lyra had built. She worked as an engineer for the colony's infrastructure, well respected despite the occasional prejudice against Kalathi. Hope attended school with human children, bright and curious, asking questions about everything. They didn't rush into anything. Jake rented a small apartment in town and visited often, getting to know his daughter, relearning who Lyra had become. They took walks through the wheat fields, the three of them together, Hope running ahead while Jake and Lyra talked about everything they had missed. "What happens now?" Lyra asked one evening, watching Hope chase butterflies in the fading light. "I don't know," Jake admitted. "The war might end soon, or it might drag on for years. But I'm on extended leave, and I can put in for a transfer here if you want. If there's a place for me in your lives." Lyra looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the same fierce determination that had kept them alive through impossible circumstances. "There has always been a place for you, Jake. You are Hope's father. You are my partner in this, however unconventional it may be." "I'm not asking for romance," Jake said carefully. "I know what we have is complicated, but I want to be here for Hope. I want to watch her grow up. I want to be a father, if you'll let me." "Yes," Lyra said simply. "We want that too." Hope came running back, breathless and happy, carrying a butterfly that had landed on her hand. She showed it to Jake with pride, all four of her small arms gesturing excitedly as she explained everything she knew about butterflies. Jake listened, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. This strange, beautiful child, this impossible daughter who existed because of cruelty but survived because of love, she was living proof that hatred didn't have to win. Months later, when the peace treaty was finally signed, ending 15 years of war, Jake was reading to Hope under the twin moons of New Cascade. Lyra watched from the doorway, a small smile on her face. They weren't a conventional family. They were a human soldier, a Kalrathi warrior, and a hybrid child who belonged to both species and neither. But they were home. And, for the enemy's child, for whom he had endured every pain, every sacrifice, every moment of separation, Jake had finally found something more precious than survival. He had found purpose. He had found family. And perhaps, in time, he had found love in the most unexpected place imaginable. Hope looked up from her book and smiled at him, and Jake knew that every scar, every sleepless night, every moment of agony had been worth it. She was worth it. They both were, and that was enough.